I agree with all of that. What you just said, I agree with that.
Well, well, give me
My
something then. Or
my take.
convert. You either convert or you give me a response. Welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Braxton Hunter, and today I'll be having a discussion with an atheist who's a friend of mine. We'll talk about where we disagree and argue a little bit, but this isn't a debate. It's an exploratory conversation to find out where each other are in our worldviews. I hope you enjoy it, and if you haven't subscribed yet, we'd really appreciate it. Welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Braxton Hunter, and today, along with me, is one of my I want to say close friends, but I'll just say a good friend in the online community. I wish we could be closer. And that is, well, he goes by the moniker, the Faithiest Atheist. And I'll get him to explain that in just a minute. But his first name is Richard, and Richard has just become a great friend. He is an atheist or a non-theist. We'll let him talk about that. But Richard, it's just been a long time. We've been talking about having you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Man, thank you. Thanks for having me. You know, I've watched a lot of your shows, and of course, you and I hung out in Texas, and I got to hear you preach. So it's just really great to finally be on your show.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, Richard is known for, number one, always putting hilarious but pretty much non-offensive posts on atheist and Christian content. Usually you'll think he's about to say something that's going to really upset you or trigger somebody, and then you find out he was trolling you all along. And but he's a really great guy and works with a lot of times apologetics conferences. Even though he's an atheist, I mean, he works with the Texas Baptists at the unapologetics conferences. He's always with Eric Hernandez and Leighton Flowers and Mike Lycona and all those guys. And so he helps with those conferences. And that might not make a lot of sense to you. I mean, that's kind of, is he some kind of turncoat atheist? What's going on here? Why have you felt led to do that, Richard?
So there,
led. Did you hear what I just said? I used Christian language. Why did you feel led of God, Richard?
Oh, and speaking of Christian language, you guys, for people who don't know me, you're going to hear me talk like that all the time because I was raised Southern Baptist, so I definitely speak the Christian language. So you're going to hear me talk like that a lot in my language too. But there's two answers to your question. First of all, like when I help Eric with his conferences, that's more like the former Southern Baptist in me and the former Marine in me. I actually just went to a Greg Koukl conference a few years ago. And I walked into the church and I just realized they needed more men to help set up. I mean, the church was great. It was a Saturday event and they just didn't have as many guys to help set up. So I just naturally jumped in. And then the Marine in me kicked in and I realized like they need like a logistics guy here to help be sort of a diplomat between the church and the conference. And then at the end of that conference, Eric was like, "You work for me now." And I'm like, "Yes, sir." So now when they do the conferences, not even as an atheist or a believer, just as like a guy who can help get things done and understands the church and understands logistics, I do that now. So that's the first answer. And then the second answer is that because I've been doing this for a while, there's several Christian organizations now that have me go around the country and speak to different Christian groups, also as a diplomat and like a liaison to say, okay, why do some of these arguments sound like kill shots to us? What are atheists thinking when they hear this? And so I'll give like I don't want to say lecture, but a long talk that talks about why I'm like the way I am and why some atheists might not agree to some of these arguments that sound good, but aren't quite as powerful as they think. And then there's some things you guys say that I think aren't working at all. But I, and I'll tell them that if we have that close trust, I'll tell them that. So I have those few organizations that do that, and then these conferences that I do with Eric, and then I also just go to church. There's a local church nearby. I'm part of their Bible group, and my main thinking there is the same reason like some Christians go to mosques or Hindu traditions is that they're just learning how other people think. Everybody has like a moral and intellectual set of standards that lead to their worldview, and atheists and agnostics are the exact same. They might not recognize that, but they do. So I like to learn how people get to where they are. And so I'll sit in and not confrontational, just listen and be a part of it, and identify myself so that they don't, think that I'm being sneaky, and just learn and just be part of that experience.
Well, you have played such a supporting role in this way. I know there would be some atheists, and we'll get right into more of a focused discussion on maybe how Richard and I think a little differently about things. But I would imagine many atheists thinking, well, hey, man, this is actually not good because
Right.
Christians and religious people in general are going to vote according to the things that they believe, and they're going to hold positions. They're going to impact the nation in which we live and the world in which we live. And so you should be helping to crush this thing so that we can have real freedom of thought rather than helping to promote it. Just as an anecdote, I think you'd probably be okay with me sharing this, but I remember when we were at one of the conferences, the one I was at with you, you said, I said, well, okay, but what if, I understand you want to be helpful here, even though you don't believe, but what if like I brought you a young woman or a young woman came to you at this conference and said, sir, she didn't know you're an atheist. She just sees you helping. And she said, sir, I need to know how to begin a relationship with Jesus. I need to know how to get saved. What would you do? And you said,
go ahead.
Yeah, you said you'd find one of us and you'd say,
Yeah.
hey, this girl's got some very important questions and blah, blah, blah.
Absolutely.
And I just thought that's really interesting. But I think there's a lot of atheists who would say that's actually, you're doing something wrong there.
Right. I get so much pushback from them. And so a big part of that is the person who's approaching me, what's in their heart, where are they coming from? And yeah, man, if somebody's either young or they're like, just lost a loved one and they're really scrambling, I would do everything I can to try to get them to somebody like, Bobby Conway. You guys, of course, you guys know who Bobby Conway is. Somebody like that. In fact, I did that once. There was a conference, a teleconference that Bobby Conway was giving. And because there were so many atheists screaming on the chat window, like, show me this, show me that, they missed, Bobby Conway and his admin staff missed this lady who was like, I'm struggling. I just listened to like a Sam Harris thing and I'm not sure what to do and I miss it and I'm upset. And so I like reached behind the scenes and got a hold of the admin staff and like, look at this lady, look at what she's saying. And they had to like find her because there was so much chat. So then they were able to reach and contact her. And then because of that, they sent me a copy of Bobby's book. Because in my mind, here's somebody who's struggling with life and they're trying to get back. And in that situation, it doesn't seem like it's right to say, oh, it's all made up. It's all crazy. A, I don't believe that it's all crazy. And B, that I can't prove that it's all made up. And if somebody's looking for structure, I don't know, if there's like a humanist group that can be as helpful, great. But if somebody's like religious and they're trying to get back, I'd much rather have them talk to like a scholarly apologist who's skilled at that than to say, hey, forget all of that and just do it on your own. Because I don't know that that's the best pathway for them.
Well, I'm immediately thinking of other questions, but let's just get into this a little bit and maybe some of them will come up along the way. So, what I would like to know when I begin talking with an atheist, even though you and I have kind of a history, we haven't really talked directly about this too much. I remember on the back porch in Texas one time we had a little conversation, but I'd like to know like what your worldview is as much as it is filled in. And so I would ask you these questions. I think this is a good way. And for anyone out there listening, since you help Christians figure this kind of stuff out, I think this is kind of a good way to approach a conversation with someone who doesn't believe the same as you, because you want to make sure you're not talking past each other. And so one of the ways to do that is to make sure you understand with some degree of specificity what their worldview is, make sure they understand yours. So I think these are some good questions to kind of approximate where you're at. So how would you answer these questions, Richard? And I'll give you three. How did we get here? Like human beings or the universe, how did we get here? What's the meaning of life if there is one, or how do you think about the meaning of life? And then what happens to us when we die? How would you approach those very small and unimportant questions that we face in life?
Yeah, actually, I think they're very important questions. And I always appreciate apologists who start with that. I've heard like 3 to 5 questions that apologists often say, and they'll say everybody has an answer to these questions, but not only that, your answer to these questions will dictate how you live your life. And I absolutely agree with that. So I always encourage people, if you hear somebody who wants to talk about their worldview, you should go over these questions. The 3 that you just mentioned are a great starting point. Because it does have a lot to do with how you live your life. But I'm going to fly through this real quick. just so we can, keep talking and then explore what we want to explore. But my quick question about how we got here, I honestly believe that that no one knew, there was no mind that knew that humans would be here. So like, I'm going to throw out some apologist names like Michael Jones. Michael Jones was saying, and he and I'm not sure if he still talks about it like this, but Michael Jones was saying, like, at the very beginning of the universe, when it was just like a tiny point, he was like, all the programming that got to us here was already known at that point. It just, it hadn't happened yet. And he's not saying Calvinism or anything, but he's like, humans were already going to be a thing at that little point in the universe. I agree at that point in the universe, and I agree the space-time expands, and then a bunch of weird stuff, stars, planets, life, and then you go through the whole simple to complex life, and now humans are here. I don't think anybody knew that there was going to be humans. So I do think a bunch of amazing, inspiring things that I can't explain happened. And then finally, some primates that were able to think and reason and look at the world around them and make inferences about how it all happened and learn about space-time and be able to measure backwards to that point. It's amazing and inspiring. And when I meet like a theist who's like, there are Mormons and Muslims and Hindus who are like, you cannot tell me that somebody didn't set all that up. And I'm like, I'm not even going to try. So I understand why some people say there had to be a planner back at that point. I think that there wasn't. I'm open to it, but I think all of that stuff did happen without a planner or a designer, which I realize is a statement of faith, but look at my name, Faithiest Atheist. And then the next one is meaning. So I think meaning is internal. So I think we come up with meaning on our own, but it drives us. So meaning is why we do what we do. And if it's something that I made up, it's just how it is. I think a lot of people's meaning come from within, and they don't think so. They honestly believe that there's something out there that's calling them, which drives them more. It makes them actually work at it better. But not only that, if they can describe that external meaning to somebody else, now they have a team. And so now there's more people kind of working together. So atheists have a harder time with this unless they do something like Sam Harris and say flourishing or humanism or something like that. Sometimes I think, there's a community that just got hit by an earthquake. Let's go get them back into houses. That's a pragmatic goal that's external to us that we can agree to, that it's important to us. And then we all start helping with the earthquake. So I think it's internal. I think people who are religious don't realize it, and they think that it's been projected to them from above, but that they're not correct when they do that. But if they're helping me after an earthquake restore a village, then I don't care. If they're like, hey, I'm only here because God said to, and so are you, and you don't realize it, then I'll be like, okay, maybe so. Just help me move this. Let's move this, and let's try and help this town get back to normal. So it doesn't bother me if someone says they honestly believe that meaning comes from up there. Now, your viewers might not know I work in the counterterrorism world. So if someone says God wants me to kill these people, then I take issue. Then I'm going to push back, and I'm going to say, are you sure about that? Let's study epistemology and ontology and philosophy. I would push back if somebody thinks that God wants them to hurt other people. But if they think God wants them to respect and love other people, then I'm like, yep, sounds good. It probably is true. I'll be very, very open to that kind of God, and maybe even lie a little bit about how open I am to it, just because I like where they're going with it. Now, and also if it's true, then then I'm embarrassed, and I'll later I'll be like, man, I had that wrong. But I just like where they're going. And then finally, third, when we die, I think we go to dust. I think we're not here anymore. And I think afterlife experiences or near-death experiences was that there's still some mental activity happening, and and the person remembers that, or they came back and then they sort of rewrote in their mind how some of that happened. I have heard of some stories where they heard something in the next room over, and I don't know how to explain that. So there's some mysteries out there where instead of me pushing back and saying there has to be a physical explanation to it, I'll just concede that it happened, and I don't know how it happened, and I'm inspired by it. If it turned out well, I'm inspired by it, and if it turned out awfully, then I'm sorry that it happened. So I don't claim that every single near-death experience, that I can prove that it was physical or that it had to be physical. I'm open to the idea that there could be something that for some people that cures cancer overnight, or they can hear something in the next room, and I understand it. I don't get it, but it doesn't make me think that one of the existing religions has to be true because of that.
So when you say you're an atheist, are you, would you put yourself in the sort of colloquial use of the term online, that you're kind of in the lack theist camp and call yourself an atheist, where I would say you're kind of agnostic, but maybe lean toward atheism? Is that?
Yes. And this is interesting because I know, Kurt Jarris, he and I have had these talks, and he said, you're actually closer to deism than you are agnosticism. And actually you have a lot to do with that, Braxton, and I'll get into that in a second. But I absolutely agree that atheist used to mean, once people said, hey, let's come up with the name atheist, they actually did mean no God. It was no Godism, not Godism. It was no Godism. I absolutely agree that used to be how it is. But man, words change. The English language didn't exist when Jesus was walking around, and now it does. So he created a language, and sometimes those words, the words change. Like peruse. Peruse used to mean study intently, and now people say, oh, I perused it. I lightly perused it. So it's a word that meant one thing and then completely changed to
same with the word scan. My dad tells me that scan used to mean to look intently at something, and now it just means to kind of glance through it. Okay, well, I here at this point, obviously I have my own thoughts about how those words are used and whether it's important and why. But for this point, I just want to know kind of where you're at. So I think I've got a picture of that now. It looks like we've got.
I want to say one thing real quick because you had a lot to do with this. You were talking about I want to say a timeline, which is like 100% no God and 100% yes God. And where are you on that football field or on that scale where there's 100% over here no God, and then here's like a maybe and 100% yes God. I have two little football fields. My football field is there definitely nothing in charge, or is there definitely something in charge? That's one little football field. And then the other football field is, are all the religions of human origin? So over here would be, they're all of human origin. No, there's nothing making those religions true. And then is at least one of the religions actually true? So on this bottom football field, is there absolutely nothing or absolutely something? I would say every so often I get around that 50-yard line, and then maybe in a tough time or when I'm super inspired, I might tiptoe over there on the 51. Like, man, what am I doing over here? And I'll get back, but I get inspired or I get upset, and maybe it's because of the way I was raised. So that's why Kurt Jarris says, dude, you're closer to deism than you are agnosticism. And I concede that. That's fine with me.
Well, I'm glad that something I said helped you conceptualize where you're at that way. That sounds like progress. Now, if we can get you a little further along that football field, I want a touchdown.
Yeah, and I'll say I disagree with this because this is something I had a really quick conversation with Doug Groteis about. But I disagree that that's actually the reason why I have those two football fields is I actually don't think that some Christians say, if I get you that close, then maybe I might get you to the truth of Christianity. I actually don't agree with that. But on that top football field is, are religions definitely false, all of human origin? I'm like at the 98, 99% line that, they're almost all false. So my wiggle room here is that maybe it would take a lot to get me to convince that any of those religions are true. I'm almost positive that all the religions are made up by humans, not deceptively, not evilly. We're not trying to be evil. We're really just trying our best. That's where a lot of atheists will say, okay, you can come in. We'll let you in, because if you're pretty sure that all the religions are made up, then you can come on in.
Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of an atheist naturalism. I might say agnostic, but kind of a naturalist, materialist perspective in terms of meaning. Sorry, did you want to say something else about that?
Just like when it comes to naturalism or materialism, I'm open that, there might be stuff about reality that we just don't know yet. So I'm not like Sean Carroll that's like, here's the particles, here's the forces, ask me a question and I'll answer it with these two charts. Okay. I don't necessarily agree that that's all there is, but so I'm open to there being more. So So
and then in meaning, the purpose and meaning aspect of it is kind of like an existential atheist sort of position where you meaning swells up from within you, but it is it's not external. It's not something ultimate. It's not granted to you or assigned to you by someone or something else.
Right. That's my stance.
Yeah. Okay. So So with that, I think I understand kind of where you're coming from. What do you understand my position, the Christian position that I hold? Because there's a lot of quote unquote Christianities, and I might reject a lot of those too. I certainly would. So
Right.
what do you understand Christianity to say in about a paragraph?
Okay, yeah, I do think that kind of Christianity is all over the place, and I don't blame Christianity for that. I blame human nature. But I would say, like for you, if I'm in a room with you and Pritchett and Eric Hernandez, Leighton Flowers and all them, I would say you guys literally believe that God exists in three forms. That Jesus Christ is His Son, and also God. He came to Earth. Uh, we're a sinful species, and that needs to be dealt with. He came to earth and died and was sacrificed for us, for all of humanity. And then to show us that, he died and then rose again. And he literally resurrected. It wasn't like, people just think, oh, it happened up in the cosmos, and it's timeless. It literally happened, body in the tomb, person comes out. People are like, what? And he's showing himself. So it literally happened, and it freaked people out, and it changed the world. And then he ascended back into heaven. And so now people have that story to tell. And I don't mean story from your case. They have that information to spread to the whole world so that the whole world hears what happened. They realize that they're obligated to accept that gift. And then once they understand that, that will transform them. They'll live the life as best as they can. And then when they pass away, they'll spend eternity with their Creator in heaven.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is since I'm personally very interested in evangelism, I would say that Jesus came to bring a kingdom. This is part of the good news. And that kingdom is a spiritual kingdom that is spreading around the world and has spread around the world. And that it's by trusting in Jesus and repenting of your sin, turning to Him, that you become a part of that kingdom. And that's obviously very important. But I think we're on the same page in understanding kind of the thrust of what we're doing with Christianity. So now that I kind of understand what you're saying, and I think you understand where I'm coming from, what do you think? What are some? And you and I've talked a little bit about this. Some people are not used to thinking about things this way,
Right.
but I like to think in a conversation like this about an inference to the best explanation. So given what you've presented or what you hold and what I hold, my worldview and your worldview, there are going to be things that you and I both agree about. There are going to be facts that we both think are true facts. And it's just going to be whose worldview makes the best sense out of those facts. And you've heard me say this a bunch of times, but like if I came home and I found a football in our yard and I got to figure out, why is this football here? Maybe I have three options that come to mind. One option is that my wife bought a football for the girls, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. My girls don't like football. And anyway, this football looks a little worn in, like it's been used for a while. So that's one option. Another option is that aliens beamed it down here just to confuse me. And that's, I guess, technically possible from my perspective. It's epistemically possible, but it doesn't strike me as likely to be true. I have no reason to think that. Why would they want to do that? That sort of thing. And then the third option would be that the neighbor kids threw it and it landed in our yard. I think I've seen them playing with a ball that looks like this before. They're always playing with a ball like this. Oh, well, that's probably the best explanation. So it's not like a slam dunk, which people often want in syllogistic argumentation, but it's just inference to the best explanation. So I want to do that with worldview. I want to look at my worldview and your worldview and see which one makes the best sense out of some facts. So what I would ask from you is, there are obviously reasons that you don't accept Christianity. There are reasons that you say that you're almost 100% certain that none of these particular religions is true. And so what are some facts that maybe you and I would probably agree about, where we can start from, that you would say your worldview makes sense of, but my worldview, my Christian worldview, doesn't make a lot of sense out of that?
I love this question, and you actually might be the first person that's asked me this. However, I've heard you say it on your show, so I'm actually glad that you're asking me that, because I've thought about this, literally for years. I've been on your show. I've been watching your show for years. I do have an anecdotal story that I often tell people when I go and do my talks, but
Yeah.
just to specifically, I'll do the anecdotal story later, but just to like give you my argument using what, pretty much your kind of language, is that our human species, when it comes to embracing the worldviews, and we're all either going to be a part of a religion or we're not. We're going to think religion is wrong, or we're going to think maybe, or we're going to think I've never heard of religion, or we're going to think I don't care. I care about sports, my family. Which actually, I think that's actually the worldview probably more people have than they admit. But out of all those people, most of those people are wrong. In fact, 6 billion people, when you look at our worldviews, at least 6 billion people are wrong. And that's if Christianity or Islam is true. Then 6 billion people are definitely wrong about their worldview. Maybe they're right that there's something, and maybe most people think that there's something. But in terms of the details of their worldview, over 6 billion or so people are wrong. They have what they believe is wrong, yet they cling to it. They pass it down across generations. It's what moves them. And so that would mean we're a species of mostly wrong worldviews. That would be my first observation that I would say might make more sense to what I think than. And I've heard you say why you think Christianity makes better sense of other religions, but I still think mine's better. But that would be the first fact that I would throw out. Do I keep going or leave it there?
No, we can talk about that fact. So you're saying that if Christianity is true, if we were to assume for a second or ask the question, is Christianity true? What that would mean is it would mean that the vast majority of people who are alive today and perhaps have ever lived are not going to be saved, to use churchy language, and they'll not come to a saving knowledge of Jesus. And that just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Am I basically getting that right?
Right. And I would be okay if you said, well, when they die, they'll be judged differently. And, God will say, in your situation, you're fine because you did the best you could. And with what you understood, you're fine. So I'd be okay with, like, I'm not mad that they're not going to go to heaven. I'm open to ideas about why that is. But yeah.
Yeah. So what I would say in a situation like that is, and of course, every time I say anything to you, Richard, because like you just said, I know you've been listening to the show for a long time. I feel like he already knows what I'm going to say before I say it. With a lot of these things, but I would think about it this way. So just as like, if you take evolution and you have the position that this took a really long time and things developed from one, but ultimately we did get this really incredible situation. I can apply it if someone finds that to be acceptable. I think that we could say a similar thing here. So for one thing, this show's not over, and ideally there will be many, many, many more people who come to faith in Christ. But that still doesn't answer to the question of, even though you said this wasn't particularly the thing that bothered you, but that wouldn't answer directly the question of the people that during that process don't ultimately come to faith in Christ during their lives. And here's where it kind of becomes a question about what is known as the fate of the unevangelized. What happens to people who never hear the gospel? How are they going to be judged? And to the extent that that's part of what causes this problem, and I should say alongside of that is also we want those people to come into the kingdom. Now, I think those two things are the same, but this is a kingdom that we want them to be a part of, that we want the whole world to take part in. And so it's very important. That's why, missions work, evangelism, that sort of thing is very important to us. But I would say that there are a number of answers that Christians have given for how God might judge such people. In Romans chapter 1, verse 20, it says the invisible things of God's eternal power and divine nature are clearly seen through what has been made. So the way I was raised and the way Billy Graham talks about it, and I think the way that William Lane Craig holds, or at least holds as a possibility, I think is quite reasonable. And you referenced it, you gestured toward it just a few minutes ago, which is the idea that it may well be that based on the scripture that we do have, that when someone is open to the revelation that they have, in this case, the revelation from nature, it seems like, oh, there's a God. I know you're not moved by that at this moment, but you said you could see how people are moved by that. So they see this evidence that it seems like there's a maker. It seems like there's a creator for this, and cultures seem to come up with this idea all over the place. And so it could be that God judges them on the basis of the light that they've been given. We know that scripturally speaking, this idea that to whom much is given, much is required. So if you're given more information, there's more required of you. And so the people that are given more revelation because they live in a Western country, perhaps they're judged on that basis. There's other options. Another biblical option I think that Leighton Flowers gives is to say, well, look, in the story of Cornelius in Acts chapter 10, here's an individual who was responsive to the light that he was given. He wanted to know more about the one true God. He had, he was genuinely open. And so God sent someone to deliver him that message. And I have found it interesting that in the Southern Baptist Convention, you and I were both raised Southern Baptist. I've heard it said that when we reach the 1040 window, which is the term for communities that have not yet heard the gospel, oftentimes the people we find there are saying that they were just praying and asking their God to reveal himself in some way. Now that I can't give you demonstration that that's true. I'm just speaking kind of off the cuff about what I've heard, but I think that would help. But even without that, I think we have a couple of options there, and there's obviously more options for how God might deal with that. In the question of, does it make more sense than your position? I think it makes sense given the fact that we have so many people who have this immediate inclination that there is such a God. What are your thoughts on some of what I've just said?
My big thing is that I do believe that most people on earth, when I talked about that bottom football field, is there nothing or is there definitely something? I do think most people on earth are like, there's definitely something. I mean, don't, stop kidding around. There was somebody who, recently on our street, their family was upset because she said that she was an atheist and she was upset. And so she wanted to talk to me because she knew that I wasn't a believer. And her dad was like, she's going to write you a letter if I don't let her talk to you. So talk to her. And so we took my dog and our kids went with us and we walked around and we came back. I'm like, she's fine, because she talked about all these Bible stories that she didn't believe and, things about God that didn't make sense. And I was like, well, what about everything? What about the fact that anything exists? And she's like, oh, there's definitely a God. Are you kidding me? It's obviously something, because how else would all this stuff be here? And I'm like, okay, let's go home. And so I said, okay, her problem is going to be the stories in the Bible and some of the things that you guys said, but whether there's something, she wasn't even thinking that.
She's already sold on that.
Right. So I said, I know she was a kid, so I didn't go beyond that. But I think so many people think that, and maybe that's because it really is that way. So the fact that most people think there's something is either like a biological delusion, which is what I suspect is what's going on, but it's meaningful and it pulls you, because if you think that power wants you to do something, then you might be more likely to do it. It's like that in real life. If especially when I was young and just getting up in the world, if I knew that my parents or my teachers expected something, and then when I was in the Marines, if I knew that somebody higher up expected me to do something, and then when I became a leader and I knew people underneath me, that was even more compelling. When I knew that people were going to wake up expecting that I was going to do something, that got me out of the wreck. That got me moving. So the expectations of others can really compel you to move. So I suspect that there's enough amazing things for you to reasonably suspect that there's something anyway. So I'm not thinking that you're just living in a padded walls making stuff up. It's reasonable to think that there is something, but it also moves us. And so I think that we believe that something's moves us, and then we come up with the details about that something based on our experiences and our surrounding community. So,
but Richard, when you say it's reasonable, or you suspect that it's a biological delusion,
right?
It makes me think about when atheists, and maybe this is to what you're referring, this pareidolia, I think it's referred to, where we have this design feature, where we seem to have this impulse for recognizing what might be design, so that if you see the grass undulate in a very aggressive way, you think, oh, that could be a tiger, so I better, and it may not be a tiger, but it's just you've kind of changed yourself. And we look at faces that way, and we look for design in nature. It's why clouds look like things, or the popcorn on your ceiling looks like things. But if that's what's going on here, it seems to me, at least with what the Bible calls creation, the invisible things of God's eternal power are clearly seen. The thing that we see most obviously is the creation around us. That seems like I can see there could be some of that putting design on it, but it seems to me kind of almost like a conclusion that one draws from looking around. and hey, this seems designed, like this thing we built over here looks designed.
Right.
So in what sense? Because it seems like you look at it and you make a judgment about it internally. There's a lot going on there we don't have access to, but they're doing some thinking about it, and they arrive at the conclusion. So talk about that just a little bit, because that seems to make sense to me.
Right. And you're talking about a lot of stuff that I think about too, because, and I made a post about this earlier on my Facebook page. But I talk about how when you see a watch, you definitely infer, even though you didn't see the guy make it, you definitely infer that somebody made it, because look how complicated it is, especially an Apple Watch, especially if it's turned on. And if you could see all the things that it does, you're like, somebody made this. I just think that there were times where we thought the same thing about lightning, especially if you saw lightning strike a tree while you're all out talking, and suddenly, you're talking to each other and you're like, maybe we should do this. And then lightning strikes a tree. I bet you everybody in that gathering was like, okay, we're definitely doing this, or this was a sign, and maybe they argued over what it was a sign for. But that seems, even now when I learn about all the stuff about all that it takes in the atmosphere for a lightning strike to actually happen, and the energy, and just the fact that the earth is here, all of that, I'm like, I could easily see how someone would think of that just like the watch. And I'm like, I think some of that stuff we got wrong. And over the years, we realized that it wasn't a signal from God to send the lightning strike. Although at the time, if you had said that at the time, people would have killed you. They would have said, you can't think that. So it took us a long time.
They would request a lightning strike. But the thing about, I know you're comparing, it looks like you're comparing the fact that the people would say the lightning was an act of God with a purpose toward punishing someone or something, or doing some catastrophe, versus the complexity thing. But if I look at the lightning and all the stuff that goes into that you just described, I actually still see design there, just not the design you're talking about of the intentions of God.
Okay. And actually, this brings up another good point. I've been saying for a while now that even if science comes up with a natural explanation for every single thing, like we can go back to the beginning of the universe and we can naturally explain every single thing that we don't understand now, and we can show that it all happens naturally, theists are going to be having a field day. What might happen is the ones who said that God had to intervene, they might have to change their ministry. They might have to, delete some of their books. But other theists are going to use every bit of those explanations as a great designer who was able to design us from this quantum realm all the way up to this cosmic realm. All of those questions are not going to be a field day for atheism. As much as atheists are like, let's find this answer and we'll be fine, it won't be true. Theists will still be able to say this was all part of fine design.
Well, this is kind of what happened with evolution, isn't it? I mean, at first, everyone bucked at it, or at least in the 20th century, people bucked at it, and people, thought this is, the enemy's attack and all this. And then now in the past 20, 30 years, you started seeing books that argued that, no, this is incredible. It couldn't have happened in the amount of time that it did. Why did it seem to have this trajectory? How did, all those kind of questions, so that Christians are now arguing. But I'm kind of taking a more meta look when I look at things like this. It's like, okay, either let's say special creation happened. Obviously, that's impressive. Obviously, to me, that indicates a creator. But if it's a process of evolution that arrives at Braxton Hunter and Richard today, that still is impressive, because what's impressive to me, even though there's things we could talk about in terms of processes, what's impressive to me is that we didn't have something like this, and now look at how seemingly perfect for its environment it is, or whatever, that the very fact that it's here is impressive to me, despite the process.
I completely agree with that. And, like I told you before about that kid who said, oh, obviously there's a God. My two daughters, I think you and I both have two daughters. Mine are 14 and 16. But 10 years ago, my oldest, who was 6 at the time, was bashing religion. And I did not train her to be an atheist. My wife's Christian. We taught them both.
Tell me the truth, Richard.
Yeah. What about what?
That you didn't train her to be an atheist.
I didn't. I said, look, we're a
Okay.
religious species, and right now we actually live in Mormon territory. So I'm like, you're going to hear more from Mormons than anybody. But then there's also Christianity, and then you're going to meet people. So I told them about religion. I said, I don't believe it. And my wife was like, and I do believe it. And so my 6-year-old doesn't currently believe it. It's 16 now, but at 6, she was trying to talk my 4-year-old out of it. Because we have a lot of Mormons. I know they don't like to hear the word Mormon, and when they're in our house, we don't say it. We'll say Latter-day Saint, but everybody else says Mormons. So all the stuff that they've told her, and she's telling my daughter, she's like, oh, they make stuff up, and she's sort of like the online atheist, and there's a different story about that. I didn't teach her that. And my 4-year-old at 4 years old said, but look at all this stuff at 4, and I'm driving the car, and I could see her in the rearview mirror, and she's like, but just look at all this stuff. So I'm like, that's like contingency, cosmological argument, fine tuning, all rolled into like a few words. I'm like that, and I even said that is a good argument, even though 4 years old. She's like, I don't understand what that means. That makes a lot of sense. So I will always think that no matter what scientists show, I will always say, look at all this stuff and the fact that some of it works, and that's why on that bottom football field, I probably will never get below 49 or 48 towards nothing, and I might tip my toes over to 51-yard, 52-yard line, more maybe, but
okay. I don't mean to break. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that's why Kurt Jarris was like, it's more deism than agnosticism. I can easily see that.
Yeah. Would the design argue? Well, let me not go there yet. So when we talk about this issue that you raised as something that makes more sense on your worldview than mine, of only you would have 2 billion Christians. So this God only got 2 billion out of, or whatever it is, 8 billion. So, okay. How do you respond to what I said there about, well, hold on a second, this is in progress. And if we say it's in progress, like if I said that Christianity came on the scene yesterday and we've already got 1,000 adherents, you'd probably think that was pretty darn good. Right. And it wouldn't bother you too much that the majority of the world was not Christian, because you'd see that, well, yeah, but it started just now and it's in progress and it's heading toward a trajectory. Well, when I think about the fact that Christians early on said that this was going to be a worldwide evangelistic appeal and go to every nation and all these kind of things, and it did, and it's got 2 billion, that seems like we're in progress, and that's a darn good trajectory that makes it make sense on my view more from my perspective.
Okay, yes, and so I have 3 things to say about this, and I'll try to make them quick. The first thing is in 2 recent books. One is Dominion by Tom Holland, not the Tom Holland, but the historian, the atheist historian Tom Holland. The book Dominion, he talks about how most of us in the Western culture, we use Christian language. We're a Christian nation, and even the atheists are Christian atheists, because the language that we use to object is Christian themes, and I agree with that. And then the second book is J. Warner Wallace's Person of Interest. And in fact, I'm finally going to go see him. Out of all the apologists and all the apologetics events, I've never seen J. Warner Wallace. So I finally get to go see him in November in California. But his book, Person of Interest, which came out about the same time, talks about the rise of Christianity. And I absolutely agree with those books, that we speak Christian language, and that whatever happened in that time, in Jesus' time, really did take over the world. And both of those are true facts. My view, and especially because I work in counterterrorism, I study, my education and my professional career, my academic and professional career, is how humans kind of act like bees. We're sort of like ants in that we're more of a swarm than we are an individual person. And so I'm like, okay, in this species of worldviews, and our glue are our worldviews, there's going to be a dominant one. And right now, the 2 dominant ones are Islam and Christianity. And in 30 years, is one of them going to take over the other one? I don't know. So I would say, okay, yeah, you're looking at a species that's a swarm species, and they go by worldviews. And of course, they're competing with each other. And out of all that competition, one is going to dominate. And so right now, we live in a world where one is dominating. So that's my second thought, is that's how I see the world. But my third thing, to kind of scare some Christians, maybe I won't scare you, But I think that the height of Christianity is over. Not in terms of numbers, though. I think a whole bunch more people are going to use the word Christian in our lifetime. So, like, I'm 53. You're not quite 53. You got some time to 53. I think in our lifetime we're going to see it so that almost everybody is saying the word Christian, 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 but nobody means the same thing. There'll be, I think one apologist said the Barna Group research, which is research that they studied, said that Bible believing Christians are down to like 6%. I think it's going to go lower and lower, and everybody's going to be saying Christian, but they'll have a Bible written by AI. They'll have an icon. They'll have posters on their wall of different things. There'll be polytheistic Christians. I think it's going to go all over the place now because of social media. So yeah, it's growing in terms of numbers, but in terms of the themes, I think that's going to dissipate. So that's sort of my.
Well, obviously, I can't argue with our speculations about what's going to happen in the future. We'll just have to wait and see. But that's interesting. I'm satisfied with that. Anything else that comes to mind when you think of things that my worldview doesn't do a good job answering, but yours does?
I can't right now, but I just to recommend, I think atheists need to start with what's observable. Things they need to give credit to Christians that, that glue that it held us together has helped us get to hospitals, and, being able to like walk into a strange place as a stranger and nobody turns on us, like is what happens with chimpanzees. We should give credit to this social glue. And we're in a Christian world. So when you meet a Christian who's like talking about the good things of Christians, I think atheists should say, yeah, there's a lot of good things of Christianity, and we need to stop just saying that it's all poison. That's just something I wanted to throw out there.
Well, let me ask you this, Richard. To that point, is Christianity good for America or bad for America?
It's aspects. So, in my view, we're stuck with the swarm that we have, and there's a lot of good things there because there's other countries that say, okay, here's our swarm, and in our swarm, you better keep your mouth shut and you better not say a word. In fact, there's like a secular version of that going on in China right now, where they're not using religion, they're using the government, and they're saying we're the authority. And they have like apps on their phones at some of the citizens where if you speak bad about that authority, you might not be able to walk into a store, or you might be treated differently because of what you said about the authority. So your loyalty to that authority, and there's no deity, there's no religion here going on. This is just a swarm based on the authority of the Chinese government. And your loyalty follows you around with your electronics. So if you leave religion, you're not going to get away with this. You're going to need a swarm that thinks about the well-being of everyone else. And Christianity, and especially a lot of the original Christians, we could talk about this forever and ever. A lot of the original Christians were thinking about from the bottom line. And even Tom Holland, the atheist, says they weren't thinking about elite forces, mandating what everybody else does. They were thinking about the people on the ground level and the well-being of them. There were a lot of Christians who thought about that. And so that's a thought that we need to carry with us. And leaving religion isn't going to get us there necessarily. You can leave religion and then say, we're going to borrow this theme, but you can't just not be religious and then expect that you won't end up like China, because you very well might end up like China.
Okay. All right. So this is interesting. So far what's happened in this discussion is we talked about what your position is. We talked about what you shared, what you understand my position to be. Yeah. We've talked about what at least one big thing that you think is makes more sense on your position than on my position. Is it okay with you if I share with you some things I think make more sense on Christianity than they do on your position?
Sure. Yes.
Well, I'll list them first, and then we can talk about maybe whichever one you want or something like that. But okay. I think there are several. The existence of the universe, so cosmology, that sort of thing, the fact that we're here, the fine tuning of the universe for life. We've talked about that already a little bit. Yep. Our impulse for beauty, yes. Morality, the impact of Jesus, which is a little bit of what we've talked about with the Tom Holland stuff that you brought into this. Yep. Obviously, whatever you think about Jesus, the message of Jesus, as it was understood by some of his early followers, seems to have set the world on a trajectory that now in the modern West, we have all of these, impulses for justice and empathy and the downtrodden and all those kind of things that, as you say, Tom Holland kind of argues that this is built on a Christianity at some level. So the impact of Jesus, the worldwide expansion of the early church. We've even talked about that a little bit. Near-death experiences, consciousness, and the strong indication that we have free will.
Yeah, those are all good.
Inclination that we have free will. Sorry.
Right. Man, I think morality and free will are the two that I really like to talk about, especially because I work in counterterrorism. We study about how morality comes to be. So I have a lot of books on morality, so I definitely want to get into that. But real quick, just talking about the list that you talked about, I would agree with just about all of those. All the fact that there's something, the fine tuning, the worldwide expansion, those are all facts. Those are things that really did happen.
That's the idea for those watching. I'm trying to pick facts that I think that Richard will agree with me that this is true. So the impact of Jesus, that's true. He agrees that there's been a huge impact because of Jesus. He agrees that these near-death experiences, that these are reported and something is going on. He may not agree with how I explain those. But all of these things are supposed to be. So like when I say beauty, for example, or morality or free will, maybe I should say our strong impulse that there is objective beauty, morality, or free will. So
yes, and I would say, like, if I had to walk through the evolution of us, I would say not only was life one of the steps, but the next step was decision making. And there's so much research now that's showing that life, very, very simple life forms, are making decisions even before neurology. And this hasn't even become mainstream yet. There's theist and atheist scientists who don't want to talk about this. But like, and this is all going to tie together. So just give me a quick second. But this is like,
hey, Cook, man, that's all right.
All right. Like in the past 10, 20 years, they're saying, okay, there are cells that are showing agency. So there's no neurology yet, but the cells are like, and an example is they'll take an amphibian that when they amputate the leg, the amphibian has evolved to where it doesn't grow a new leg. That's happened. There's species that said it's not worth the energy to amputate, to regenerate. They'll take another amphibian where it does regenerate. So they amputate the leg. It turns out those cells start talking to each other. There's like a bioelectric language. And scientists can now read, not all of them, but some of them. They can say, we can at least repeat that signal from these cells at that amphibian to regenerate. And we can take that signal and we can artificially put it on this other amphibian. So we've amputated it. Those cells are like, too bad, so sad, we're not regenerating. They retell the cells new instructions based off of the bioelectric chemicals from this one. And then these cells change and they not only build a leg, they tell each other, we're going to build a leg. We're going to put the leg here. Here's what it looks like. And when the scientists try to stop them, the cells work their way around it at the best of their ability. And when they get to the leg, the cells tell each other stop. There's no neurology. And they're like, but there's a goal. They're making decisions about how to get to that goal. And then when they reach it, they stop. And there's atheist scientists who are like, can't be. In fact, the guy who's running the guy who's running this experiment, his name is Michael Levin. He's like, I'm an atheist, but I still say, yeah, it is. It's repeatable. I can show you. They're showing agency and decision making. Worse, it's not even coming from DNA, because they've also found out that with those worms that you can split in half, if you take one of those worms and instead of telling it to grow a tail, you tell it to grow a head, it'll be a two-headed worm. And when they replicate later, they're still two-headed worms. So that new information gets passed down to different generations.
So what are you saying? That's fascinating.
Yes.
I can listen to you talk about it longer. You keep saying that the atheist scientists find this,
right? Because they're like, where's this agency coming from? Because atheists used to be like, oh, the DNA developed naturally and it's just telling the instructions, but that's not happening. It's happening at the cell level. So you have this free will at the cell level with no neurology, and some atheists don't like that, but that's what's happening. So I like to say, okay, there's living organisms. They develop goals somehow. They develop how to create to reach the goal together. So they're working collectively. And Seigart, another Christian scientist, talks about this a lot too, about how cells are working together as a team without even any neurology. So my take is that happens, and then morality develops next, which is like a determination that you're going to reach this certain goal, this is where you have this perception of ought and should. So I think it's still biological. I don't think it's been projected from above onto us. I think it's something that happens within us. But I think that what happens is when we're a swarm species, and I know I'm skipping a lot of steps here, but for the interest of times, we're a swarm species, and we're going to have moral standards that we think everyone else ought to follow, and we're going to enforce it within, sometimes brutally, sometimes not, but we're going to have these moral standards. I think that's just a part of who our species is. I can easily see why everybody from every religion says the fact that we have these oughts and shoulds. It's not like my favorite movie. It's not like my favorite ice cream. This is something that gets me angry, gets me passionate. It means something. This is where I get my meaning and my purpose. This is a completely different thing than my favorite ice cream or my favorite movie. And because we notice that distinction, I can easily see why people says there's got to be something above us. I think it's not above us. I think it's a biological, neurological distinction, but not from above us.
Now, it sounds like from the way you just phrased that, I know that people have the impulse to think it's a wholly different thing than my favorite flavor of ice cream.
Yeah.
You're, under the hood that you're saying, I know they want to say it's not subjective like that. It's objective. It's something other. Right. Is that what you're saying? Do you think the morality because of that is subjective, or would you call it objective?
Well, I would call it objective, but I would be wrong. So this is one of those things where I'm inconsistent.
You mean it's based in objectively real biology? Is that right?
Right. It's no. I would say objective because I would feel it. So like if someone came in and said, something that really affected my moral system, I would be like, man, that is objectively wrong. But it would really be subjective. It's just that I'm not going to act like that. I'm not going to. There's apologists who say, okay, you say that it's subjective, but you don't act consistent with that. Everything about you violates that, and that's true. And I think atheists don't give credit to this. This is where I part ways with a lot of atheists. I think it's subjective, but we act as if some of it is objective, and it's because of this biological, neurological distinction between preferences and opinions, and this absolute perception of oughts and shoulds. And I think working in counterterrorism, this is the heart of my my career, but it's also part of my Faithiest Atheist message, is that this moral stuff really, really pushes people. And the terrorists who are out killing people and saying we ought to kill people, for them it's objective. For them, God, and not all, obviously not all terrorists are religious. There's atheist terrorists who say we need to kill religious people until religion's gone. But in their mind, they're thinking there's this ought and should that we need to agree to, even though they don't think that it's been bestowed upon us by an agent. They just think that it ought to be that way because the cosmos demands reasonable, loving people. And yet, as terrorists, they're saying we need to start doing these violent things to make people stop being religious. So being religious or not being religious does not get you out of this. You definitely make a distinction between preferences and opinions and oughts and shoulds. And I think atheists need to start with that, rather than saying, no, it's just stronger preferences and opinions. No, this is things that you get really serious and passionate about, and that you believe is objective, even though you're probably wrong. And I admit that I'm probably wrong too.
Well, yeah. So to put the spread out here for people that may not be totally familiar, I say it like this all the time. Richard's heard me say it this way, but if I had a bubble here, a sphere, and we call that the morals, this is a moral sphere, one of several. Yeah. And here's one, and people like Richard are in that moral sphere. They share Richard's ideas about morality. And so in that sphere, as long as everybody's sharing that, they have that they've chosen, or maybe he wouldn't say chosen, they feel the same sort of impulses and think the same way about them in that sphere, then Richard can tell someone else in that sphere, well, what you're doing is right or what you're doing is wrong, because he knows that they kind of agree to the same situation in that sphere.
Right. And I would really think that it's subjectively true. And if someone came down and says, this is really in your mind, I would get mad and angry, and I would be like, no, this is really true. But
I really think this is objectively true. We'll
uh,
put a pin in that for a second.
yeah,
But then if there's another sphere over here where people in that sphere are functioning like the young David Wood, let's say, who
yeah,
bashed his father's head in with a ball peen hammer and
right,
really didn't have the same moral. We're not saying he didn't have any morality. He had a wholly different take on morality.
right,
Okay, that sphere over there, David Wood in that sphere might be able to tell other people in his sphere what he thinks about things, but Richard could never tell. And this, I get your reaction to this. Richard could never tell someone in David Wood's sphere who thinks of morality that way, what you're doing is wrong. Now he could say, I don't like that, or I think you should stop that. But if he says it's wrong, he's making a value statement from within a completely different sphere. So what the Christian says, and a lot of religious people would say, is you do have those spheres, but there's a sphere that overhangs all of them. That is the one that anyone in any sphere can appeal to and say, no, there is an objective right or wrong, and you're wrong, David Wood, to do what you did to your father. That is wrong, not because your sphere says so, but because reality says so. So that would be, and so what Christians often want to say about that is they want to say, look, that what is happening there is, oh, and you've added some nuance that maybe we have to reframe this, but it is a subjectively chosen goal. That is, there's nothing, when I say subjective, there's nothing ultimate hanging over that says this has to be the goal. There's a subjectively chosen goal. And then there are objectively better and worse ways to achieve that goal within your sphere. So even if I don't agree with your morality, Richard, if you said, well, to me, the greatest morality is to own a blue coffee cup. That's the highest expression of morality. Well, I may think that's ridiculous, but I can still say, well, there's better and worse ways to get a blue coffee cup, you know? So what's your reaction to all of that? I know you understand that.
Yeah, I do. And there's so many things, like people who are watching who don't know about David Wood and his story. And I'm going to meet him in El Paso here in a few weeks and watch his lectures. He's another one that I can't wait to talk to because he and I actually have a whole bunch to talk to, because I work in counterterrorism, and he focuses on the dangers of some Islamic thought. But what I wanted to really push back on this is that even atheists see that objective sphere, but they don't realize it. A lot of atheists, they also see that objective sphere. What I'm saying is that might be a delusion, but we do see it. We're like, I'm not talking about things that I've chosen. I'm not talking about ways that I was raised. Who cares about that? I'm talking about this objective ought that applies to the entire universe. And by gosh, why don't you see that? Even atheists do that. Everybody does that. And so again, working in my capacity in neurology and things, there is an exception to people who don't do that. And that's like psychopaths. There are people who are psychopaths. And this is why I don't think that David Wood is a psychopath. So I can't wait to meet him, because I can't wait to talk to him about this. Psychopaths really just don't care. They're just like, that's not true. Now, some people can just be selfish and say, hey, I'm selfish, I don't care about this. And so what David did was he hit his, he abused his dad while his dad was sleeping. And so he blames that on atheism and psychopathy. He says he's been medically diagnosed, but I think there are people who are just honestly don't care. And so they just don't have that biology. They don't have that neurology where they think about the welfare of others. Atheists are doing that. They're actually envisioning a utopia of society where nobody has religion, and we're all just watching out for each other. I don't think that's a realistic utopia, but they do absolutely see it. And so they say morality is subjective. Morality is subjective. What they're envisioning is this giant bubble where everyone ought to accept that morality is subjective. My ministry, my preaching, if I was up on a pulpit preaching, I would say everybody except for this small handful of psychopaths, everybody on the planet believes in that large bubble, but that large bubble might not really exist.
Yeah. So when I'm thinking about this, like where this debate goes, when people talk about it is, say William Lane Craig throws out his moral argument, and the argument is, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2, but objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. Right. Okay. So premise 2 there, I think back when I first got interested in apologetics in the early 2000s, most of the atheists, and the debates you had were not online because YouTube didn't exist, when you saw a debate, it was usually live in, on a stage somewhere. And most of the atheists would grant objective morality, or would agree with premise 2 that there's objective morality. They would just find some other way to ground that, that big bubble that we're talking about here.
Right. And I think it's just less rational. A lot of atheists like Sam Harris are like, oh, well, we're all agreeing on these common rules. But I think it's less rational than that. I think it's more automatic. It's more immediate, and it's not something that you consciously realized you were embracing.
Yeah. And so, but then, for now, maybe 10 or 12 years, I've noticed a shift. And now more and more atheists are saying, no. Often they'll just say it. No, it is subjective. But we can still build a morality within that's meaningful, and all that sort of thing. And haven't you noticed? It seems like there's much more of that now. Yes,
I have seen that, because they see that as a concession, and I think we should concede. If I could go to atheist headquarters, they would kick me out. But some places, from what I understand of these atheist places, you've got your R and Ra, and people like go away. Then you really just have like some humanists who are like, hey, let's go see if we can go help a hospital. So some places would kick me out. But I would say we should concede this. We do believe that there's objective, and it's not based on this rational, like, okay, let's go over a list and then we'll all agree and then that'll be our morality. It doesn't work like that. It's automatic. It's something that happens non-consciously. Most of our mental activity is non-conscious, but it's sacred to us. And when I say sacred, for an atheist, sacred would be unassailable or inviolable. It's something that you don't mess with, but it happens non-consciously. And we have moral rules in our unassailable, inviolable parts of our mind that it's informing us of something, and it's driving us, and it's making us passionate, and is giving us meaning. And I still think it's biological, and I still think it's subjective. However, I would argue back with myself at the time. I'd be like, no, this is the higher bubble that practices.
Well, yeah, this is where I want to go. So I want to say, okay, look, the way that this often goes next is if someone challenges premise 2 of Craig's argument that objective moral values do exist, then that's where the times, and this is what is said. I heard, I saw David Paulman, a mutual friend, I think, talking about he didn't like this. Yeah, he didn't like this answer, but typically the answer goes something like this. Someone challenges premise 2, you say something like, well, look, how do I know that morality is objective in this way? Right. And the reason I know is because I have this access to it in my own experience. The only way that we can learn about morality, in this sense, is to look inward and observe it. I mean, you can look at statistics about how people function and what they believe and what they like and what they think is moral, but like to observe it directly yourself, you have to look inward at your own moral impulses and your own moral feelings and that sort of thing. And that's not the whole answer, but that creates an impression that you are admitting here, an impression that this is objective. Okay. Right. Even though you're saying, I think deep down in a somber moment, I don't think that it is, but it creates this strong impression. Now,
I think it's a delusion, but I will act on it. If I walk out of the office and someone violates what I think is objective, even though I would admitting here that I'm wrong, I will still act on it. And then David Wood can be like, you're inconsistent. And I'll be like, right. I am, but I do think that.
Yeah. So, but the way that this has been argued is to say, look, a good argument is one whose premises are plausible, by which we mean more likely true than false. So, if you were going to present a good argument to me to show me that morality is not objective, I think that argument would rely on one or more premises that are less likely to be true, that are less plausible than my immediate experience of what I take to be objective morality. And now that sounds weak to people when they first hear it, and maybe it is weak, but let me give this beside it to see, so people can compare. So like, imagine that I gave you an argument that you don't exist. How good would the argument have to be? Well, you immediately know there is no argument good enough to convince you that you don't exist. Because why? Because there's any argument to show you that you don't exist would rely on one or more premises that is less obvious to you than your own experience of existence. Now, I'm going to be fair and say, obviously, the morality impulses, though I think they're extremely strong, and you think they're extremely strong, I won't say that they're as slam dunk as my impression that I exist. But I will say they're strong enough that I've yet to see an argument, and I have a hard time imagining an argument that would have premises that are strong enough to overcome my immediate experience of morality. And I would say it sounds a little bit like you might actually agree with that.
Right. I would say I'm never going to out argue someone who believes it, but there's good and bad here. If I'm talking to you and, Eric Hernandez and Leighton Flowers and Pritchett, that's fine, because there's no harm done, because in your mind, you're like, okay, now let's get back to helping our communities thrive and taking care of our families and making sure we're okay. We would do that. But if I'm arguing with ISIS soldiers, there's probably there's no argument I could present them that God does not actually want them to go and torture and murder people until the world lives their way. However, they know that I'm wrong, and they know that I'm just weak, and there's probably nothing I can do to persuade them. But they might have some sort of experience, like what happened in that movie American History X, where you think you know something and then experiences change you. Maybe that might happen. But when I meet someone who's absolutely convinced that their moral system is right, I know better than to say, I'm going to present arguments to you to show you that you're wrong. I know it's not going to work, because I'm actually talking to like their inner self that drives them. The only reason I would argue is if their moral system tells them to attack me. In that case, I might have a discussion.
Yeah. And my moral system doesn't say to attack you, so you can feel good about that. But, but I do, what I'm doing here is actually not saying, rather than saying, don't argue with me, I'm actually arguing with you and saying, Richard, I think you have this same impulse I have to maybe close to the same degree. And I might be merely saying, because I know you've thought about these to a deep level, but I'm merely saying, yeah, but that might be real. Like that might be objectively real. Doesn't it seem like maybe it is?
Yeah. And I'll agree that it seems that way. And I'll just hesitate to say, I think that it's a biological illusion. And then I'll say, at the same time, if I start to think that I need to harm other people, or that my moral system is driving me to harm other people, hopefully there's like the remnants of an ancient moral system that I had that would stop me, or at least, reach out to somebody for help, and maybe stop myself before I start to think that I really have to harm other people. So I think it's an illusion, but I think it's very, very powerful. And when someone says, yeah, but you kind of know it's real. Yeah, but I don't trust that. I don't trust that kind of knowing that it's real. I think biologically it's probably not. There's so much about our neurology that's an illusion. There's so much that we think we're just actually taking in the data, but we're not. It's like the middle of our brain is really actually projecting it out to our perception, to our conscious awareness.
Yeah, well, when I said let's put a pin in it a minute ago, when you said no, we need to admit that we do believe in objective morality, but we think it's a delusion or something like that.
Yeah,
or we could think that. So that's not I think what you're saying is that's not a contradiction in your worldview, because gun to your head, you're going to say it's subjective. Right. But in the moment, we could say in the moment, when you're experiencing what seems to be objective morality, you're conflicted, or maybe there's some momentary cognitive dissonance or something.
Or you just do it. Like you're going to do it, because my thing is that natural selection is watching what we do. And this stuff right here, this is why I love morality. We could do a whole show on morality. Morality is what gets you going. Meaning and morality is what gets you moving. It makes you bond with other people. It makes you hate other people. This is why we get online and be like, you're wrong, or we make great friends, online too. This is morality and meaning at work. I think it's an illusion, but it gets us moving, and it has everything to do with how we live our lives. So, it's just why we feed our kids. It's, it's all this stuff that we do. So it drives us. So I don't even experience conflict when I'm doing it. All I'm saying is that after I do it, after I, say I go and save a drowning child, and then an alien from another dimension comes in and says, there was no objective reason for you to do that, I would say, okay. But then the child drowns again, I'll still going to jump in and still save him. And the alien's going to be like, you're being inconsistent. I'll be like, yeah, but I'm still going to do it. And so there's not even any.
So what's up with that? Are you just saying it's so ingrained that it's part of my species, kind of?
Right. With one caveat, is that if this same stuff is telling me that I need to go and push a kid into a pool, then hopefully there's some aspect of me, or hopefully I I've surrounded myself with enough friends and family that they would stop me from doing that and call the police and, and lock me up. So I'm not saying everybody go with whatever you're saying. I really do think we should do something like what Sam Harris says, which is come up with some sort of rules, for some pragmatic, observable rules. But then I just think Christians would be helpful in that conversation. I think Christians would be like something to do with systems and institutions that help us behave like a healthy swarm. If we're going to be a swarm, let's be a healthy, productive swarm. I think we should invite a lot of Christians into that conversation. So
when Kurt Jarris, when Kurt Jarris tells you that you're more like a deist, is that, and you say that maybe there's something to that. Is that what you mean when you say occasionally you're 51% on that football field?
Well, when I feel like 51%, it'll be like the birth of my kid, or something really inspiring. Just me thinking about.
Yeah, you just saw The Notebook.
Yeah, something like that. I guess I had been so desensitized to The Notebook that by the time I saw it, it didn't have the same effect. But there's been movies like that. Dead Poet Society is one of them, where I really have this moment that I'm like, do not tell me that we're all just making this up. I don't want to hear it. And that's me talking to myself. So that's what Kurt.
You need to listen to yourself, Richard. So, but to be clear, are you saying, like, is that the scale we're on when we're talking about whether you're a deist or not? When you say there's something, that's that scale, and the most you've ever been is, I mean, in recent years has been like 51%.
Right, because I do think that when I'm inspired and I'm enjoying it, it can almost be like I'm in church and I'm in, because I was raised on Christian music, and they're singing a song that I remember watching you preach. Ladies and gentlemen, Braxton Hunter on stage, I have seen a lot of apologists. Braxton Hunter is the best, and I'll tell this to
Eric man, that means a lot.
Braxton Hunter is the best because he owns the stage. He's like a cross between an apologist and an evangelical preacher, because that's how he was trained, because his father still is one.
Thank you.
So, like, being inspired and lifted up, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. Now, sometimes I'll be like in a Mormon. With Mormons, it's more. My experience is more like in their house. We're all singing a song together or talking about someone's testimony, and I'll feel that inspiration with them. But I think that's just a non-conscious swarm behavior. But for the time, I'll go with it. A third day concert,
secondary burning in the bosom going on there. But yeah,
right. And I'm totally okay with it. I don't feel like I'm being inconsistent, but I'm okay with it because there's no harm done. Like in a third day song, I'm like, man, this just feels really, really great.
Okay. Stop. Third Day. You like Third Day?
Love Third Day. First two albums.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Consuming Fire is just a great rock song. The harmonics in there and everything. All right. But me and Richard also know that we like similar music. But okay, with Third Day, the song Thief.
Yes. Even though it's not, is it the first? It might be the first album. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. It's the album that has Consuming Fire and the bus on the front of it. Okay. Well, the reason I'm asking is because that, I'm a thief, I'm a murderer, and he's hanging next to Jesus. That song is to me, in terms of a piece of art, is so incredibly moving as you hear this story of this thief on the cross, and he hears that today you'll be with me in paradise. And
he's the guy next to Jesus.
Yeah. Doesn't that, like, is that an example of something where you might hear it and think, and I imagine what you're thinking. Let me think about it the way I think you might conceptualize these things, and tell me if I'm right. Is kind of like the
I'm feeling it now, by the way.
What's that?
I'm feeling it now, by the way. Just
good. Feel it more. Feel it more. But you feel you hear a song like that, or you think of Jesus, the God of the universe, choosing to being the type of being that would choose to be born in manure and dirt and hay, and then be the God of the universe, whether you think it's true or not, born in that situation, and then hanging on the cross and hearing that thief, say, thinking of this man shouldn't be up here with us. He hasn't done what we've done, and getting that salvation. Do you look at that and think, look, wherever this came from, it's incredibly powerful, beautiful, and inspiring, even if it's not true?
Absolutely. That's where I'm at. What you just said right there. Absolutely. Because even now, having done this, so I guess I completely walked away from Christianity, where I've started saying I'm not a Christian in my early 20s, and now I'm 53. So 30 years of atheism, I still listen to Third Day, And my atheist friends will be like, that's inconsistent, or that's wrong, or maybe you're thinking about it. And I'll say, well, no, I honestly think my experiences and my work in counterterrorism have convinced me that this is something that we do to ourselves. But if I'm doing something to myself and it's an illusion, but I enjoy it and it's not hurting anybody, and goodness forbid, I almost said God forbid, goodness forbid, it's actually helpful to other people, I'm going to go with it, and I'm going to be okay with it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Richard, I have one last thing I'd like to ask you about. And by the way, folks, we came into this kind of winging it, but, and it's more on Jesus specifically.
Okay.
So what do you, when you read scripture,
Mhm.
well, here's a question. This may sound like a ridiculous question, but as many conferences as you've helped with, and you're the most Christian atheist in the world, do you ever pray?
Yes, but in the last 30 years, it was an emotional, either I'm really scared, or, I really don't want somebody to get hurt, or something like that. I do. What I don't know is if whether that's really me at my most reasonable, or if it's a product of my upbringing, because I was raised to pray, and not only was I raised to pray, but I grew up in a church. So my mom, she's more, I almost said New Age. She's more like, she still says Jesus, but it's like this all-encompassing, universal sort of thing. But back then, she was raised in the same church I was in, so that church raised me. It wasn't just Sundays; it was a lot of days. It was Wednesdays. It was the community. My youth group was my friends. So I wasn't just taught to pray. They're like, okay, no, seriously, pray while we're watching you, and we'll pray together. So it became like a enforced part of my life. So I don't know that that's really me talking to God, but I can definitely understand. This is like when I read Psalms, I can definitely understand part of me going like, there's got to be something, me calling out to something. But I don't know that that's really something, if it's more about me or not.
Do you believe that there was a historical Jesus?
Yes, there was definitely a dude, and he was definitely unhappy with the Roman authority. He was really unhappy with the Jewish authorities who were buddying up to the Roman authorities, and he was unhappy with the way people were allowing it to happen.
Do you think he was put to death under Pontius Pilate?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, certainly put to death. I could, for me, well, if it historically happened around that time, then sure, Pontius Pilate. But yeah, absolutely.
You don't have any qualms, but you'd say yes, he was put to death by the Romans.
Right, and the Jewish people at the time were okay with it. There was some who were like, "This is the guy," and the rest were like, "He keeps yelling at me, and I'm trying to take care of my family." So yeah.
Did Jesus? Do you believe that his? And I'll phrase this the way I think people like Bart Ehrman might phrase it. Do you believe that that some of his earliest disciples or followers had experiences that they interpreted as appearances of the risen Christ?
I'm less certain about that, but what I am certain is that you had Jesus and you had his family and you had his disciples. They were real people, but then you also had people around them, and some of those people around those people definitely began to say, "You didn't hear? He actually came back. He's not dead, even though he died. He came back." And there was competing stories about what happened there, and the disciples and the family were handcuffed. There was nothing they could do about it, and it happens now. There's stories that emerge. And the actual family will get up and say, guys, it's not true. But what happens? 50 million people go, they're lying. So I think that happened then. So that the disciples, the only thing I can't square with this is James. James bothers me. But everybody else, I would say, because I'm not quite sure exactly that.
Wait, back up. I'm still not sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying like the message gets out. Yeah. And maybe it's incorrect that there was some sort of resurrection, but people want it to be true. They believe it. That weren't in a position to know for sure.
Right.
And so it's out there. And then by the time there's a movement kind of starting to take off, that the disciples that would have been in the position, they just kind of have to go along with it. Is that what you mean?
Either have to go along with it or just give up, and then suddenly somebody else is that guy instead of him, or they just dismiss him. They're like, you're not in, so we're going to get rid of you. Or, we're not going to get rid of you, but you're just not with us anymore. So the story outlived the reality. So in my view, Jesus lived, Yeshua, and I don't even think that's the right pronunciation, but, whatever. He died and stayed dead. People came to believe that he came back. It became part of a messianic movement. And that narrative outlived the truth of what really happened, even the people. So there was like decades where people were like, I know better, but I can't do anything about this.
Yeah, well, you said, okay, do you accept, would you accept the results of Sean McDowell's study about the deaths of the martyrdoms of the apostles?
Yeah, I don't know that we can trace that. I've read some books on it. I just don't know that we can really trace what happened.
Would you say it's likely that 2 or 3 of the disciples were martyred for their beliefs?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anybody who was part of that movement was all in. If you're part of a movement like that, you're all in. And if you really believe in it, then the fact that social pressure is pressuring you, you may or may not give into it. So I'm sure some of them said, no, I'm going to hold tight. But it might not have been people saying deny Jesus. They might have said embrace that he came back, and some of them might have been like, dude, I was there and I didn't see that. So they could have been martyred for
wait,
something else.
back up. Say that, but you're saying, like, let's take Peter for example.
Right.
'Cause he's one of the ones that we have good reason to believe, and he would have also been in a position to know about as much as any particular person would want.
Right.
So would you say, so your theory seems to have some moving pieces in 2 places, because you're not sure, obviously.
Right.
So one of those is maybe Peter was involved, and maybe Peter just went along with it because it had already taken off and he didn't want to throw cold water on it. Or Peter really did believe it. That it had what was the other option there? Or is that the option? Is just it took off and he just kind of went along with it? Do you
Right.
think
Some
he
people get caught
believed
up
it
in
or
it,
not?
like I even think that Joseph Smith knew he was making it up, but after a while went with it. I mean, they're treating him like God. Pretty soon he believes he's talking to God.
Okay, but do you think Peter, what I'm getting at, obviously, as you know, kind of probably where I'm heading is with his execution, well, and just his persecution in general, why endure that if you aren't really confident this happened?
My thinking about Peter is that he got not only caught up in it, but there was something going on that for a while was in his benefit. And at the end, there was nothing he could do to get out of it. So for a while, he got caught up in it. And, Catholicism allegedly started because of him. I think he had enough of a movement that this is why I say James is the only one that bothers me. I can see how Peter got caught up in it and just kept going. And then there was nothing he could do. Once it was over, he could say whatever he wanted to say. And even if he did renounce it, what are his followers going to say later? But no, he didn't. So I think he might have gotten caught up in it. The reason why James bothers me is that I don't know that he did anything with that. And allegedly James was his brother. And I think James was a historical person. Like I believe what happened to Paul, and I believe Paul went and actually met with a physical James. So James bothers me. But I can see how Paul just came to believe it even though it wasn't true. And I can see how Peter got caught up in it.
Well, wait a minute. Walk me through that. How does Paul come to believe it?
Well, I just think that he really was trying to. Well, okay. So here's another thing. I don't know that he really had that kind of experience in Damascus, but I think he was trying to stop it, and then came to believe that maybe that was true. And then when people says, "Why do you believe it?" Maybe he said a strong feeling, and they're like, "Oh, okay." And then a year later, he was like, "No, I was on my way to Damascus," and he came up with a better story. But he definitely changed his ways. He was definitely, I believe he was a historical person, because when I read his letters, I don't get the salesman vibe from him. I believe that he really was trying to stop it and then changed his ways. And it happens now. There's atheists who are like, I've got to stop these Christian guys. They become friends with Christians. They start having these conversations. They change their ways, and then they're completely different people. They're transformed. Their whole life changes. This is a real thing that actually happens, and I think that happened to Paul.
Well, let me back up here for a second and ask this question. Mm-hmm. So you said on that you got one scale that has to do with whether there's nothing or whether there's something. Right. And you had another scale that is whether any religion is true versus no religions are true. Or like one religion, at least one religion is true is one side of the scale. The other side of the scale is no religions are true.
Right.
Now, when you say you're 98, 99% on that one. That no religion is true. Now, when you say that, do you mean the central claims of all of these are false, or just the robust expression? In other words,
Right.
God's existence and God raising Jesus from the dead, is that included on that scale?
Right. Yeah, I would think that that would just be narratives and not like I imagine if there is some sort of a God that created everything, I can't see that he would try to reach us in the way that Christians describe. Having a son come down and dying for our sins and making sure that we all understand that, that doesn't seem like, and I'm putting myself in that position. I get that. The people are saying you're projecting yourself onto this guide. I get that, but I think we're all doing it. And I think that it doesn't make sense that he would go about it the Christian way. It makes more sense that religions, to me, it makes more sense that religions are these worldview bubbles that are competing. One of them is winning, and it's currently Christianity. And they've done a lot. Their standards and their moral and intellectual standards were more effective, and their fervor and their group effort outcompeted the other ones. And so,
well, let me ask you this about that. So, or let me suggest why I think Christianity makes better sense of that you just referenced of among all these religions, Christianity and specifically Jesus. I think so. You're not convinced that there's a God. You're not convinced of even deism,
right?
But you might be on the fence about it, or be 50-50,
right?
At some time. So let's think about this. If I got you to the place that you believed, yes, some God maybe exists, some creator, some personal creator exists. Don't know anything more than that. Don't know what he likes, what his favorite foods are, nothing. I just know that there is a God that exists, or at least I think there's good evidence for that.
It would be tacos, but go ahead.
Yeah. A Mexican pizza if it's Eric Hernandez. So you've got that. Do you think if you came to believe that there was some God, that it would be a fair assumption that since we are here as social beings, and he's the creator, do you think it would be a fair assumption that he wanted social beings to emerge?
To that we wanted social beings to emerge, absolutely. That would absolutely make sense to me. Just that alone, that he would want us to be social. We would be more like ants or bees or wasps than we would be like an individual warrior, on our own. That part
so these are the things I'm kind of presenting here. So you've got a God who's a personal God, and he intends to emerge these social intelligent creatures. And do you think, this is the last assumption I'll ask you to make, but do you think that it's likely that if we thought there was a God who intended to create social intelligent creatures, that he would want to socialize with them?
Yes. And this is where we might have our own show, because I think that's where Christianity falls apart.
Really? Yeah. Well, let me finish the thought here, and then we can maybe address that. And then we'll try to wrap up soon, because I know we've been going for a long time.
This is great. I always imagined that when we had this talk, we would talk about this stuff.
Well, good. So if you believe that a God who wanted to create social creatures would want to socialize with them,
yes,
then you might start looking at the major religions in the world and say, is there one that kind of pictures that? And pretty quickly you would land on I think you can call away polytheistic religions on logical grounds.
I've heard that. I've heard those arguments.
So, and maybe not all of them, because some quote unquote polytheistic religions don't. It's really just like we have angels. They might call something like that gods.
Right. So some of them still have a hierarchy.
Right. But I think you can call away. And then of the major religions left, you would basically have the Abrahamic monotheistic religions, and those happen to also be the ones that offer evidence, that attempt to be evidential in that way.
Right.
And right smack in the middle of those three, it's interesting that they're all focused on the God of Abraham. And right smack in the middle of those three, there is a person who changed the world and claims to be God wanting to socialize with people.
I agree with all of that, what you just said. I agree with that.
Give me something then. Or convert. You either convert or you give me a response.
Right. So and here's why I like doing this, because a lot of atheists don't go the route that I take. And I think, well, I think I'm right. Here's another thing. If people are like, I want a reason to not like this guy, it's because I think I'm closer to the truth than religious people and most atheists. So there, you can take that and say, oh my God, this narcissist.
No, you should think that you're right. I mean,
right. Right. So here, sometimes I'll say that and people will be like, oh my Lord. So here's what I think. If there is this guy who had 14 billion years and he's got the fine tuning and he's been working on the cosmos for 14 billion years and he knows that we're coming, he knows we're going to be here, it doesn't make sense to me that he would focus on one culture, or that he would have the people of that culture. He wouldn't have the key to his religion flourishing on that swarm of people competing with other swarms, because not all of that competition was great. There are times where John Dixon, who's another Christian apologist, even he writes about, there are times when, I wish that Christians hadn't done this throughout history. So you got all the good stuff, but John Dixon has a book called Bullies and Saints where he's like, it wasn't always that great. So that competition isn't always great. And I'm like, there's a better way to do it. There's a better way for him to interact and engage with that social species in a way that you don't have the Reformation Wars, but you do have the hospitals.
What if something like open theism were true?
Oh, okay, yeah. So yeah, I've heard this. That. So
I'm not an open theist, but I'm just playing with the
right.
pieces here on the table.
Right. I've heard the best argument for open theism is that time, if it doesn't exist yet, then it doesn't matter how powerful God is. It doesn't exist yet. So yeah, that would make sense. Open theism. It would also make sense what James White says, Calvinist, which is God knew 14 billion years ago that a couple 100,000 Christians in total are going to go to heaven, and everybody else is just going to be wrong. And you're going to have some really well-meaning Christians, but they're all going to be burning right alongside you because you're not part of that pre-chosen 200,000 or so. That would also make sense.
The logical sense, but not.
Right.
But you don't think that would make sense morally,
right? I'm not inspired by that kind of God, but then again, James White would say, "What you're James White,
you're a wicked sinner standing on a mountain in hell, shaking your fist at the Creator."
Right. So yeah, I don't know that he would personally call me wicked to my face, but he would say, "Who cares what you're inspired by?" But logically speaking, it would make sense that God just used some people would, and most people wouldn't, and who cares? It's his reasons, and we can't understand it. Or it would make sense that God really is struggling, so he really is like, okay, this is what I want, but they have free will. And, man, I told them not to go do the Reformation Wars, and they're doing it. How do I get them back from that? That would make sense. In which case, that's actually more interesting to me. It's more interesting to me that has a God that's like working with us, and there's certain rules that he doesn't want to break. I like that story. In that case, here's my problem. If I taught my kids that, there would be Christians who are like, "Don't teach your kids that." So I don't know.
I'm more concerned with you and I getting to the truth than what these Christians think. But I think either way you go with that, the dilemma or the problem that you kind of posed there, I think either way you go, it kind of resolves itself. So you could go the way of saying, okay, maybe God's omniscience isn't what classical theism says. Maybe it's dynamic omniscience, something like the open theists say. And then, as you say, it kind of makes a little more sense. Or you could go completely the other way and say, not the James White thing, but say, no, God has exhaustive omniscience of all future events. And in fact, this would loop me back to what I said initially when you raised the problem of only 200 or 2 billion Christians. And that is, if God had that level of omniscience, well, this is in progress. And he knows that each little problem along the way, each little war, each thing that we might even wish that Christianity had not done, that this is a butterfly effect sort of thing that results in the evangelization of the world. And it would be kind of hard to argue with the fact that it seems like it just spun just right that you have this global reach. That's impressive to me. But the bottom line I was wanting to make is, if you go the open theism route, it can kind of make a certain amount of sense. If you go the exhaustive omniscience route, I think it makes sense because we're in progress and he knows what the end is going to be. But those would be my responses to that.
Yeah, so I have two thoughts, and one of them I brought up before, so we can talk about that some other time. But like, if over the next 30 years it gets to be where you can't even talk to another Christian because, except for like a handful of your friends, no matter who you talk to, the things that come out of their mouth, you're like, where did you hear that? Oh, it's on this website, or it's in my Bible, and they open up the Bible and it's like a Kindle, and and the Bible has words that you've never seen before. If that were to happen over the next 30 years, would that worry you?
Well, it would worry me to a certain degree. I think this is happening already, which is probably why you think that. You're basically, what I take you to be doing is saying, okay, yeah, you've got 2 billion quote unquote Christians, but if you asked any one of those Christians about those 2 billion, they would not come away with 2 billion, because they would think a lot of those people claiming to be Christians that are included in the 2 billion aren't really in their group. And all the Christians are doing that to some degree with each other.
Right. I do think that.
Yeah. I obviously don't want that. That's why I think it's so important that we always say, look, and on our show, we do this, and most serious evangelical, Christian YouTubers, I think, say this, but hey, we want to make sure that we're together on the fundamentals, the mere Christian message about the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus, the very central things and of course we do argue a little bit about those central things, but we get these central things down so that if you disagree with me about tongues or Calvinism or whatever, then that's, we also need to be clear, since those fundamentals matter, that groups that don't adhere to those fundamentals, like the JWs or the Mormons or, people like that, we don't consider them a part of this mere Christianity, this Christian community. So yeah, it would worry me, not worry me. I don't know what you mean. It would worry me in terms of the movement. I don't think it would worry me in terms of the truth of Christianity. Is that how you're?
Right. That's another thing that I think about you. I think I've got you correct here, is that even if it comes down to like you and 5 people left in the world who see it your way, I think you would be like, this is really, really weird, but it doesn't change the ontological objective truth that Christianity is true. This is just something that I don't understand is happening right now.
I think logically, that statement, if I made it, would still be true, is that everyone else can be wrong and Christianity can still be true. Yeah. But I will admit, I think I can admit that if it was just me and 5 other people that were Christians, I would probably have stronger doubt.
Wow, okay. I'm surprised.
Well, I'm not saying that I would have stronger doubt because that there was a better argument or something. It would just be, I would be expressing to you. I think that, like you say, we're sworn. We do often functions in a sworn behavior, and I'm not immune to the pressure of that. If everyone around me was becoming an atheist. And to the point that everyone, like literally everyone except 4 or 5 other people, I would definitely start to think, am I just crazy? Have I lost my mind? What's going on? But you say that because I have been pretty clear about that I don't think I'll ever not be a Christian.
You have, after Tyler's situation, you did come out and say, hey, that's not going to happen with me.
Yeah. And I think people on both sides misunderstood that to a certain degree. I stand by it, but what I say in that video is I say that for me right now, it would make me think that or if I said something like that I reject Christ, it would mean that my brain was diseased or something like that, to my impression. Now, what's funny about this is no one caught this, but that's actually a reference. And that reference is to what Christopher Hitchens said to Anderson Cooper.
Oh, I did not know that.
When I've never told anybody, but I thought people would notice. But Anderson Cooper asked Christopher Hitchens, are you going to have a deathbed conversion?
Yeah.
And he said, if I do, it's only going to be because it won't be me anymore. My brain will be so diseased and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So I was kind of taking a shot at Christopher Hitchens with that, and nobody knew it or noticed it.
That was awesome. You heard it here first.
Yeah. You got it out of me. But the thing about it is, but why but I do mean it. I do mean it. Now, here's how I make sense of that, because I say immediately after that, but you could in principle falsify my Christianity.
Right.
Now,
okay.
people kept saying, well, that didn't make any sense. Rationality rules came on. That didn't make any sense. You can't say both things. No, I can if you listen to exactly what I said and not what I didn't say. And it goes like this. Basically, what I'm saying is, look, you could, in theory, present me with some evidence or something, or convince me that the reasons that I have for believing that it's true all fail, including my own experiences and everything else, that I'm just wrong for some reason about all of that. If you could convince me of that in principle, you would falsify my faith and I couldn't be a Christian anymore. Okay. But here's the problem with it. I'm 43 years old. I've been looking at this for decades.
Right.
I think I know the terrain pretty well. I'm not saying I'm the smartest guy. I'm not Alexander Proust. I'm not William Lane Craig. I'm not saying any of that. But what I am saying is I've seen enough of it that I basically get the landscape. And I am very confident in the arguments and in my own experiences. And I just don't see that happening to the point that I'm willing to say it's just not going to, I'm always going to be a Christian. And do I know that? Yeah, I think I know that. Do I know that with Cartesian certainty? Well, no, but I think I know that I won't ever walk away on those grounds. So let me have a little soapbox moment there.
Yeah, and I would say what you just said is perfectly reasonable. So I know atheists who are like, man, I have a lot to work with to deconvert you. And I would say, no, we're good. I'm happy with that. And I would go to church with you and listen to you and hopefully one day listen to your dad preach, other than online, because I've heard you in real time, but I've only heard him online. So yeah,
if you hear my dad preach in a revival service, I think that might do it, Richard.
I can, I was raised in a Southern Baptist church, but even then we didn't have, like, I want to say 1950s style, like real, the way he does. We didn't have that. So I think I would enjoy that.
Well, I want people to know that as we kind of wind down, that Richard sends me messages. In fact, today he told me something, and I didn't even respond to you about it, but you said something about, hey, your dad's post this morning. You have sent me before a message saying, because I think my dad said something like, when I die, I want to die in the pulpit or something, preaching the gospel. And you sent me that and said, you need to keep this.
Save that. Absolutely.
Because probably thinking, hey, at his funeral or somewhere down the road, you'll want to be able to say this. And I thought, because what Dad said was very churchy and very spiritual and very committed and very based.
Right.
And and for you as an atheist to recognize, okay, I don't believe this is true, but it's so moving that this son needs to know what his father thinks about that.
It was very moving to me. And, again, I was raised Southern Baptist, and I always tell people I'm still a Southern Baptist, because that understanding, and I know there's the dark side to Southern Baptist, but I mean, the good old wholesome come in, I always say my grandmother, even though people, she's long gone, but that kind of Christianity, that kind of Southern Baptist, I think I still follow a lot of that.
Well, Richard, I obviously hope that you will be a believer. I know that to atheists, and you're not the typical atheist for sure, but I know that to atheists that can sound condescending to say, I hope you'll come around, or I believe you'll come around, or something like that.
Right.
But I don't mean it that way. I believe this is true, and I do strongly hope that you become a Christian in the not too distant future, but certainly at some point before you die or the Lord returns. And I'm obviously going to be praying that way.
Right. And I take that like really warm-heartedly. For me, I'm inspired when I hear that. And again, I'm very picky and choosy. So like if an ISIS soldier were to say, man, I'm praying you're going to see it one day, I'm going to be like, dude, stop. It's not going to work for you. But like when you say that, and some people that I just find really inspiring, it means a lot to me, because, also in the back of my mind is, what if you're just wrong? So yeah, I appreciate that.
You mean atheists can have doubts too?
Right. That's my biggest push, is that I think we're a swarm species. We should have doubts, and we should agree that we at least perceive objective morality, and that a lot of our stuff might be illusions. But even if you're an atheist, you're not free of that. There's nothing about walking away from religion that's going to take you away from these problems that I like to talk about.
Well, Richard, this has kind of been an exploratory conversation for me to kind of prod and poke at your worldview to figure out where you stand. And I've really had a lot of fun with this. I hope we can do this more. Would you come back and do this again?
I'd love to. There's so many things you talked about that especially free will, that I think, and morality. I think we could do entire shows on that.
Yeah. Well, man, I've just enjoyed this. You're a good friend. And folks, I hope that you'll check out the rest of the channel, subscribe. And you don't have a channel yet, do you, Richard?
I'm only on Facebook, and I'm not sure. I'm still working full time in my counterterrorism, and I don't know that they want me to leave.
Are you Jack Bauer?
No, I'm the guy. I use the Jack Bauer analogy a lot. When Jack is like kicked open the door and like cut somebody's head off, and he calls the guy at the desk, and he's like, "Who's this?" And he shows the picture of the guy whose head.
Tony.
Or some. Actually, Tony's even cooler than I am. But somebody's at the computer like, "Oh yeah, that's Ahmed so and so," and we thought he was dead, and that I'm the nerd that he calls.
You're the guy in the chair. I think in the Spider-Man world they call it the guy in the chair.
Right, and then he's like, turn off all the red lights between here and the harbor because I need to get there in 10 minutes. You got it, Jack. I'm that guy.
Can you do that kind of stuff?
No, I can't. But I'm still I'm still the guy. I'm behind a desk, and the only reason I'm in shape is because I used to be a Marine, and I still do pull-ups and stuff. But I do sit behind a desk and type. I don't kick indoors.
Were you ever stationed at Camp Lejeune?
I was not for a long time, but I did do some training in Camp Lejeune.
I preached at a church just off of the base, and it was a good mix of black and white folks that all worked on the base.
Wow. Okay.
And some of them were soldiers, and man, that was just super interesting. That place is massive.
Yes, it's a big base.
But anyway, all right, Richard. Well, man, this has been a blast. And so, is there any last comment you have or anything?
Man, I'm so happy to be on your show. And anybody who hasn't heard Braxton appear, it's worth the ticket. Find him somewhere and watch him speak. It's a really good experience.
I appreciate that. And for the rest of you, we'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.